द वे फॉरवर्ड इज ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਪਿਛਲੇ ਹਫਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਜੈਕ ਬੀਅਰਮੈਨ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ 3 ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਕੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਰੀਸੈਂਟ ਡਿਸੀਜਨਸ ਆਏ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਔਰ ਉਹ ਐਜ਼ ਅ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਇਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਵੇਂ 3 ਫੈਸਲਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਅਸਰ ਹੈ ਉਸਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਲੜਨ ਦਾ ਪਲਾਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ 'ਚ। We welcome Mr. Robert Zimmerman today. And to speak on this issue, we could not think of a better candidate, a better person. I must tell my viewers, Mr. Zimmerman is a person who has spent his entire life fighting for these issues of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, against gun violence, and various issues which Democratic Party has always championed. Mr. Zimmerman, thank you very much for taking out the time today.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Harjot, for having me on this evening with you. And first of all, please call me Robert, if you would. I'd appreciate that. And honored to be with you and to be with your viewers this evening, because it's a very critical time for our country. It's a very critical time for the values and issues that we all share. And finding our way forward.
Robert, the whole community understands we all feel challenged with what has happened in the last 1 month. It is a debate in this country, which party deals better with economy at times, who has historically dealt with that better. But there's no debate that there's one party which stands for these rights, these liberties that we enjoy in this country, and we feel threatened right now.
It's interesting. I look back at 40 years ago when I was 27, and I've always, even before that, I've always had a mission in my life. I've always felt that, growing up as a closeted gay kid in the suburbs, when I was growing up, was a very isolating time, a very lonely time. And oftentimes doctors would tell you to try conversion therapy, or educators would. Obviously, I wasn't doing that, of course, but you did feel isolated. And political activism, it gave me a purpose. It gave my life a mission and a focus. And that was very important and empowering to me. I began to reach out and work with other people who felt unseen and unheard in our society. It brought me to the protest lines. I became very active in standing up for civil rights and social justice issues. Brought me to my congressman's office, where I began to work for him, became a senior member of his staff, and worked on Capitol Hill. And from there, I came home, and at a time when Nassau County was very Republican, I took the rather youthful effort to try to be a candidate, and then made the conclusion I was better off in the private sector. So I built my own business. My firm is now in its 33rd year. But I always kept my mission and engagement, public life and political activism, because I felt that was important. I worked very closely for many years with Congressman Gary Ackerman, who is certainly well known in the Indian community and been very active. And I learned a lot by working with the Sikh community on standing up to hate crimes and misinformation and the way people were isolated. And I worked with many members of the Indian community on these issues. I became head of my local B'nai B'rith. And through our Jewish community, we reached out, and we all learned a very important lesson in those years. And that is, if one person or one group is impacted, one group is threatened with a hate crime or with discrimination or with being ignored, then we're all threatened. And I think we've learned that lesson in recent years very dramatically under the Trump presidency, where we saw a tragic rise of hateful rhetoric, divisive behavior. And we've seen it growing for some time in our country. But clearly, we saw in the past years an acceptance of white supremacy, tolerance of hateful behavior and hateful language. And I think we've all learned, and I learned this at an early age, and it's been very important to me, that we have to be together if we're going to stand up, because my Jewish community is impacted every time the Indian community is impacted, every time the Black and Hispanic community is impacted, or the Catholic community is impacted. We are all impacted as one society. And so that's why standing up to discrimination, bigotry, hateful rhetoric, it's all our responsibility to do it together. And I think we are coming together, and I think being very effective in addressing it. But we have to, for example, I've worked with Congresswoman Grace Meng, but the issue of teaching history, both of the AAPI community in our public schools, of the Indian community in our public schools, and other communities as well. Because as more people become educated, they realize that we're no longer the other. We're all one. I think that's important. Likewise, there has to be, in addressing hate crimes, much greater record keeping by the federal government, much greater oversight by the federal government. And I certainly advocated changing our local bail reform laws so that hate crimes were not just an appearance ticket, but there was a much more stringent accountability for it. So those are some of the issues that really brought me into public life. Obviously, growing up as I did in the public school systems on Long Island, in Great Neck, I understand the importance, the essential need for fully funded public education so that everyone can come here and with education live the American dream. It is absolutely, that's the pathway. That's the pathway to not just acceptance, but to success in our society, a strong education. I think so. That's something I think it's very critical. One of the reasons I so greatly believe in union, support the union movement in our country. Unions built our middle class. And so having strong unions is also important as well. But we all begins with education. And that's why we have to support our public education so strongly, because that gives everyone an opportunity to move forward. So I'm a candidate, and not too many candidates talk about this, quite frankly, but I talk about the need to have fully funded public education, the urgency to make sure that in our educational system, we teach everyone's history. So we realize how much we are connected together and not isolated, and that we stand together. We have to stand together if we're going to take on hate crimes and discrimination, because we're all impacted if one group is impacted.
Mr. Zimmerman, Robert, we really appreciate and we know that whatever you say is backed up by your actions throughout the years. Our viewers understand that you're a member of the Democratic National Committee, and these are the issues you have always advocated.
Yes.
Right now where we stand, these three Supreme Court decisions overturning Roe v. Wade, the gun decision about the 100-year-old gun law from New York, and West Virginia versus EPA. These are three decisions which scare us, that they have taken us back. You are a front row. You've had a front row seat to all the development, all the progress that we have seen in this country. How do you see personally this decision of overturning Roe v. Wade in this country?
It is, let's be very clear. The decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, what has been settled case law for 50 years in our nation, for 50 years, is an assault on women, their personal freedoms, their personal autonomy. If an individual loses control over their own personal freedom, loses control over their own autonomy of their body, they lose their rights. They lose their freedom. And what's so dangerous, so that's dangerous by itself, but what's also so dangerous about the Roe decision and the way it was constructed, and Justice Clarence Thomas pointed it out, this is a door opener to address issues of perhaps reversing marriage equality, dealing with the intimate relationships between same-sex couples. It could impact contraception. This is clearly the opening round of what is going to be a very aggressive, extremist assault on our freedoms that we have enjoyed as a nation throughout our history. Historically, whether justices were conservative or liberal, there was always a respect for precedent and respect for the Constitution. This is an extremist court driven by a personal ideology, not driven by constitutional interpretation, not driven by the law, but driven by a personal political agenda. And it is going to have far-reaching ramifications. So we have to be very much engaged and alert and involved in this election, because the only remedy that we can really achieve is by making sure that we speak up and we vote in this election and stand with those candidates. And quite frankly, these are the candidates of the Democratic Party who want
Robert,
to rein in the extremists of the court.
That's why it's such a fundamental and such an important issue, and the fear that all of us have is if it goes beyond mere abortion. We'll talk more about that after a short break. ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਣੇ ਰਹੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ, ਦੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ। ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ ਇਸ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ 3rd ਕੰਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟ ਦੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਰੋਬਰਟ ਜ਼ਿਮਰਮਨ ਨਾਲ। So Robert, as you just said, and as was observed by Justice Clarence Thomas, do you fear that this will see more advocacy, and this might result in curbing of the progress that we have made in last so many years, and this can reach out to same-sex marriage, contraception, interracial marriage? Do you fear that happening?
Oh, there's no question. And the court has been very clear, despite some of their previous statements, they've been very clear about where they're going. So we have to understand the reality in front of us. It's not a question of whether they will take these actions, but when they will take these steps. And that's why it's so important that the Congress come together as a democratic Congress and codify these laws. For example, there's a movement now to codify marriage equality, same-sex marriage. So the court cannot declare aspects of it unconstitutional or try to rule it out of order. Frankly, that's why it's so urgent in this election that when people are voting, they really look at where the candidate stand on these issues. One of the reasons I've been endorsed by leaders in Planned Parenthood for many years, I've worked with Planned Parenthood because of the important role they play in our society, how important they are. And so when you're voting for me for Congress, and I hope to have the support of many of your viewers, you're voting for a candidate who's going to vote to codify Roe v. Wade and make it the law of the land so that the Supreme Court cannot take it away. We have to stand up to a very radical, dangerous Supreme Court that is taking very extreme steps. And so that's why this election is so incredibly important that people register to vote and participate.
Robert, we take actions when it becomes necessary, but my viewers would definitely like me to ask you that in the last 50 years, why has the Democratic Party failed to codify Roe v. Wade?
Well, it's a very important question. And frankly, a lot of Democrats took the Supreme Court justices at their word when they said this was going to be settled law. And it was the law. In fact, the Trump appointees came before Congress and they said they respected precedent and they understood that Roe v. Wade was settled law. And at the first opportunity, they went back on their word. Clearly, I believe, based upon the conduct of this court, those justices should be called in front of Congress for a hearing and examination of whether they lied before Congress. I believe they did. I think Justice Thomas should be impeached. And there are many other remedies I'd like to see, such as having term limits for Supreme Court justices. But frankly, those are all goals for the future. We have to deal with the immediacy of the issue. And that is, yes, I have the same frustration many of your viewers have, that Congress did not codify Roe v. Wade. It was clearly because I think they accepted it as the law of the land. And truthfully, they have to learn from that mistake and move forward from a very miscalculation, a misjudgment of what the court was going to do. But the bigger point is, how do we move forward? And we move forward as a society by making sure, and I cannot underscore this enough, I guarantee you every one of your viewers has a friend or a family member who is not registered to vote. Or maybe they are registered to vote, but they don't get an absentee ballot. Or they request an absentee ballot and they don't fill it out. We have to make sure that we have maximum turnout. Because the extreme right wing, they will vote. They will participate and turn out. We have to make sure that our voices are heard in this process. Democracy is ultimately the only way we can save ourselves, by exercising our vote.
No, we totally understand and we realize that. And, we see that the Democratic Party is taking some steps. It might be bipartisan. We saw a couple of days back this Respect for Marriage Act, which is here to, overturn the Defense of Marriage Act. Do you support that as a candidate, and do you see the whole effort getting more support in the future?
Well, it's interesting to note that I think it was 47 Republicans voted with Democrats in the House to, in fact, codify marriage equality for members of the LGBTQ plus community. Now, that was very important. And you've actually seen some members of Republicans in the Senate. Tom Tillis today, Senator Tillis, announced his support of codifying marriage equality, or same-sex marriage, if you will. And so, will there be movement from Republicans? Perhaps. We have to keep the public pressure on. You see, Tarjo, what's so important to remember is that when we talk about these issues, we talk about environmental protection and the climate crisis. We talk about marriage equality. We talk about issues such as respecting Roe v. Wade. The country is with us by 80%. We talk about gun safety and anti-gun violence legislation. The country is united with us, strongly and solidly. And so we can't lose sight of the fact we speak for the strong majority of our country, and we can't let extremists and those who traffic in demagoguery and those who try to use their partisan agenda in the U.S. Supreme Court to dictate the terms to the rest of us. So that's why voter participation is so important. Because what you saw, I'm sorry, go ahead, Taja.
We all feel frustrated. We call ourselves the greatest democracy on earth, and then there's support from the public, more than 80% on issues, and then we have the Congress legislating against that popular demand of the people, which is very frustrating to all citizens. But let me ask you this: you're a member of Democratic National Committee as well. With these three decisions, do you see the Democrats energized, or do you see the Republicans, the conservatives, being more energized, looking at these things as their success and taking it forward?
It's very interesting you say that. Yes. It's interesting you say that. I have never seen Democrats more energized, more engaged. It was the decision against concealed weapons, concealed carried arms by the court. Which was a real blow to gun safety legislation, the Concealed Weapon Act, with the court overturned. It was the decision limiting the power of the Environmental Protection Agency to oversee greenhouse gas emissions. These are issues. The climate crisis, gun violence, is not a Democrat or Republican issue. Every community in our country is impacted. Every school district I visit, they do more shooter drills. Safety preparatory drills. If a shooter should enter a building, they do more shooter drills than they do fire drills. And so every family, every child has to live with this trauma. No child should ever have to think about a person carrying an assault weapon going into their school. No parent should ever fear when they drop their child off for school that they may not be able to come back to school and pick that child up. They should feel safe in their schools. It should be a safe place. And this is in Republican and Democratic communities. Think about how many communities throughout our country are impacted by severe weather, by environmental injustice. Just in the borough of Queens, last year we lost 11 people died living in substandard apartments because of severe flooding. 11 people died because of it. How many families do we know impacted by flooding and what it means to severe weather to one's economy or safety? So these are bipartisan concerns. And I think there's an opportunity to build a strong bipartisan coalition, but through public pressure. You saw Congress recently take action on gun safety. It was minimal. It wasn't as strong as I would like it to be, but it was hopefully a first step. It's only going to be a first of other steps if we keep the public pressure on. We keep people engaged in the political process. That's what counts. And so I think that's true for gun safety. It's certainly true with the climate crisis. We've got to vote on these issues.
Robert will continue after a short break. ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ The Way Forward. The Way Forward ਇਸ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ Robert, it's as you said, it's very frustrating for everyone that a great majority of the country supports these issues that you're talking about, and still there's not much that we can do. We have seen some executive action. We have seen Congress coming for some kind of gun control as well, but I don't think it goes far enough. And then we see these contradictions that have come about. Now, the Supreme Court decisions, in one decision, the Supreme Court says that these abortion laws should be dealt with at the state level. and then it contradicts itself when it goes to gun laws for the Second Amendment issue. It overturns a New York law, which has been good law for 100 years.
Right.
What do we do in situations like these?
Well, something, I don't agree with your premise. There's not much we can do. I brought this up during the course of the interview. We have a great deal that we can do, and it's never been more important to do it. And most of all, it's about registering to vote, participating in our electoral process, making sure that the candidates you vote for support environmental protection and addressing the climate crisis. Make sure they vote for gun safety legislation. Make sure they vote to respect a woman's right to get a safe and legal abortion. Make sure they vote to respect the rights of same-sex marriage. It's critical that we speak up publicly. Nothing is more powerful, not even the Supreme Court is more powerful than our democracy, our voices. And so the challenge is on us. I know it's frustrating. Believe me, I feel the frustration. These are issues I've worked on my whole life. I'd like to believe that we're making progress. But there are no guarantees, no final victories in life. We have to work every day to protect our democracy, every day to secure the rights we have. And I think one of the problems is too many people forgot that. You've seen lower voter turnout. You've seen people less engaged. This, I think, might change that around.
There's another issue which the country is following very closely is the January 6th insurrection. That investigation. So again, historically, we have seen that the party in power, the party that holds the presidency, loses seats at the Congress. Do we fear that if Democrats were to lose seats in the Congress this term, that investigation is to be adversely affected?
Well, the investigation is going to be completed, Harjot, by the end of this year. So before Congress is out of session, this historic, very important investigation into a tragic, inexcusably terrible time of our history, a time when a president and his collaborators in the Republican Party and Congress try to overturn the will of the American people. So this investigation will conclude sometime during the course of this year. It'll be referred to the Department of Justice to evaluate whether criminal action should be taken. And so the work will be done. But Congress had an obligation to investigate all aspects of this situation. And it is really appalling how many Republican members of Congress wanted to cover it up for partisan reasons, wanted to try to just dismiss it. Nothing is more dangerous, more treasonous for our country than when you see efforts to overturn the will of the voter. And it's just not acceptable. It's treasonous. And frankly, I think the steps that have been taken, these hearings have been very impactful. And what's most important to remember is that those coming forward, giving testimony, are people who are Donald Trump's intimates, his top advisors. These are not Democrats making these charges. These are the people who work for President Trump and his team. And they're pointing out the issues about his conduct, the plans to overturn the election, just the dangerous, vicious attempts that were put in place, disregarding public health and safety, disregarding our Constitution, in fact, violating our Constitution and our laws. So these hearings will have a very important significance. And I think it also is educated and mobilizing a lot of people, too.
We fail to understand how does a president get away. So many of his cabinet members were charged with criminal offenses, and they were indicted, found guilty, but still it does not seem to have any effect on this particular president. One more thing which I would like to know what you would do as a candidate, which we really threaten. I am an attorney. I understand these issues. This EPA judgment, West Virginia versus EPA, what Supreme Court has said is that these agencies of the government may not be able to regulate
That's right.
the way we want. And I think that is of paramount importance when it comes to climate regulation. It has to be done at that level. So this might be a fundamental blow to environment protection in this country. What do you propose to do in that regard?
It's interesting. This ruling by the court on the EPA also will be interpreted to impact other federal agencies as well.
Yeah.
For example, OSHA, safety standards in the workplace. Can the government enforce making sure that safety standards are put in place in the workplace so that employees are not put in danger or they're not put in compromised situations or unsafe, unhealthy working conditions? Can the government still do that? You're going to see efforts to use this court decision to violate so many important to abrogate and violate so many important safety standards in the workplace, in the same way they're trying to use this court decision to get the federal government away from dealing with what is regarded by Republicans and Democrats alike as a climate crisis that is a matter of national security for our nation, and in fact is a public safety threat for the world. So what can we do about it? This seems to be the refrain of our discussion, Harjo, but we absolutely can take steps. Nothing is worse than giving up and despairing. That's not who we are. That's not who we are as voters, as citizens. That's not what made our nation such a unique and great democracy, such a leader of the free world. The country, we have to take our government back. We've got to stand up to the extremists who are trying to impose their agenda on all of us, because we represent the majority. And the majority supports dealing with environmental safety. We don't want our children being exposed and developing asthma. We don't want to have a lack of environmental oversight, so our water is contaminated, or people are endangered because of severe weather living in poor housing. We want to make sure that we can build an economy with clean energy union jobs. And there should be a Marshall Plan to do it. In every part of our country, there should be an effort to make sure that we have wind, solar, and turbo power, so that we can live in an environment that is free from, as much as possible, climate contamination. It's a matter of our public safety. It's a matter of our national security, too, as a nation, to make sure we can do that. How do we do it? We do it by voting on these issues. We do it by getting our friends to vote. We're doing it by getting our family members to vote. And everyone says, I vote, don't worry about me. Trust me. Every family has members who should be voting in ours. They've got neighbors who should be voting in ours. So don't lose sight of that.
ਅਸੀਂ ਉਮੀਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਬੜੀ ਕਲੋਜ਼ਲੀ ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਸ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈਗੇ, ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਫੰਡਾਮੈਂਟਲ ਹੈਗੇ। ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਮੁਲਕ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਫੰਡਾਮੈਂਟਲੀ ਟੱਚ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਲਈ ਚੇਂਜ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਰੋਬਰਟ ਜ਼ਿਮਰਮੈਨ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਆਈਏ, ਵੋਟ ਕਰੀਏ, ਆਪਣੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਾਥੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਾਹਰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਈਏ ਔਰ ਜਿਸ ਵੀ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਉਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਪਹਿਰਾ ਦਈਏ ਔਰ ਉਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਤਾਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਅਗਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਆ ਕੇ ਵੋਟ ਕਰੀਏ। ਰੋਬਰਟ, ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਟਾਈਮ ਫॉर ਅ ਸ਼ਾਰਟ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ। ਵਿਲ ਕੰਟੀਨਿਊ ਦਿਸ ਆਫਟਰ ਅ ਸ਼ਾਰਟ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ। The Way Forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। Robert, all these very important, very fundamental issues that touch everyone nationally across the country. What do you think are the top issues in the 3rd Congressional District?
It's a very good question. I think the top issues we have unique issues in our congressional district. First, we have to always be mindful as citizens of our 3rd Congressional District of the urgency of protecting our democracy, which is under threat. I think that's very important. I think we also have to be very mindful, and it's very important to me, both personally, because it's defined my life, making sure that we are together and united as a community. That's why I've been so aggressive in addressing the hate crimes that have really been an epidemic throughout New York and New York City, and we've seen them on Long Island too in many places. Standing up to extremism, standing up to divisive behavior, making sure our federal government has a much greater aggressive reporting standard, and the police have the proper tools to, in fact, prosecute hate crimes, because they affect all of us. Making sure that we all know, if the Indian community is impacted, my Jewish community is impacted, we are all united as one people in standing up. And of course, public education, making sure we have fully funded public schools so that we can all live the great American dream with with a proper and fully funded education. That's essential. So those are issues certainly that come up quite a bit in our district. I think also we have to deal with the burdening cost of living. I mean, we're dealing with record high gas prices, inflation, and it certainly impacts all of our lives. You know, it's diesel fuel that fuels the trucks that deliver the food that's causing food prices to go up. We're dealing, of course, with oil companies. In the first quarter of this year, their record profits were up 300%. They made 300% more profits in the first quarter of this year than last year. That's why I support a windfall profits tax, which is what England, the Conservative government of England, did. Put together a windfall profits tax so we could return some of the money to make it easier for American workers and American families. So we have to deal with the cost of living and the danger it represents, and also understand, you know, some of it is driven by reliance on fossil fuel. A lot of it's driven by what's happened in Ukraine. The Russian assault on Ukraine is just an atrocity, and just it should outrage the world. And so that's another factor we should consider. But we have to focus on cost of living and making ways to. I certainly support a gas tax holiday. It's providing some immediate relief. But I also believe we've got to hold the oil company executives accountable. We have to look at ways, windfall profits tax to provide economic relief for families and Long Islanders and residents of Queens, because this district includes Queens and Long Island, Queens and Nassau County. Also, we have to focus too on infrastructure. Infrastructure is the key to unlocking so many important issues. Infrastructure development provides, hopefully, the promise of clean energy union jobs, and helps. It's essential for our economy. It's essential for our public safety. Infrastructure means we can retrofit sewage treatment plants, so we can, in fact, not burden Long Island Sound with pollutants. We can protect our aquifer, which is our water supply on Long Island, and protect our water quality in Queens as well. Infrastructure means that we can, in fact, not just do the physical road repairs, which are essential to do on our roads, but we can build a new economy and open up doors for a new economic growth for our nation. So that's a major issue to me. Restoring the state and local tax deduction. It never should have been taken away. The Trump tax and Donald Trump's tax proposal, he took away the state and local tax deduction. It was a major tax deduction for Long Islanders and for residents of Queens. It's a very important issue, and we've got to get it back. That's a very important issue to me. And standing up to anti-gun violence. I've been endorsed by many leaders in the anti-gun violence movement because of my work with them to ban assault weapons, have much greater background checks on guns, make sure that we can get rid of ghost guns, and in fact have much greater safety background checks for guns to create a better, safer climate. No one should ever have to be fearful when they go to school or go shopping that they're going to be in danger of their life or liberty or their public safety. So those are among some of the issues. Abortion rights, standing up for abortion rights for women. It's a right that every woman is entitled to have, and the government has no right interfering in their choice and their autonomy. So those are amongst many of the issues that come up throughout this district. But the most important issue, I think, is we have to know that our destiny is in our hands. We control by our votes and our activity what type of democracy we want, what type of country we want. That's why I brought this up many times in the show, the urgency of voting and participating. That's really what counts.
Robert, you are a candidate for the 3rd Congressional District. I would like you to briefly state, why are you the best candidate that we should choose for this position?
Well, thank you for that. First, I want to thank you, Tarjo, for having me join your program. And I thank your viewers for staying with me during this show. I'm very honored by that. And I've always been very honored by the support I've received in the Indian community. Gary Ackerman, as a congressman, first introduced me to many members of the Indian community. And it's been a very, very moving and defining experience. I've always felt welcomed and blessed by you. So thank you all in the Indian community for this opportunity. The Congress we're going to be facing is certainly going to be the most challenging, I think, since the Civil War. Everything we believe in is on the line, from our democracy to our economic future, and the kind of nation we want to be. I bring to my candidacy a record of engagement that's defined my whole life, from working on Capitol Hill to being a Democratic National Committee member, from, in fact, building a small business now in its 33rd year. I understand the different aspects of life, both economic and business, and the essential role of the political process. I'm working in Congress to bring results back to our congressional district. And I must tell you, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. For example, in 2023, there's going to be the funding of negotiations for the Long Island Sound Restoration Fund. Many of the members of that committee, I've worked with on this issue through my own political activism, my roles on the Democratic National Committee. I understand what's at stake. When there was a threat to close the Northport VA facility and certain Queens VA facilities, I went to the chair of the House Veterans Affairs Committee and made the case to him why those VA facilities had to remain open. Other candidates put out tweets and they did selfies. I took real action because I think my background, working on Capitol Hill, being engaged in these issues, being engaged in Queens and Long Island government, I think gives me a very unique experience and knowledge of what needs to be done in Congress, both to make sure we can deliver locally for our communities, for our infrastructure, for our public safety, for our economic growth, and also what we need to do nationally. I'm very proud of the fact that my background, since I was just a young kid working on Capitol Hill, through my years at the Democratic National Committee, through my national advocacy on the networks, and my life in this congressional district, where I lived since I was 9 years old, where I worked, and where I was raised, I think well prepares me for this opportunity to be of service. I hope I'll have the confidence of those who are watching to have their support. And I hope they'll check out my website, ZimmermanForCongress.com, and see the broad collection of endorsements I've received. Certainly of all the candidates, I have the strongest collection of endorsements from elected officials, political committees, labor unions, members of Congress, state officials like Tom DiNapoli, our state controller. And so it's a broad collection of individuals that speaks to the fact they think I have what it takes to win. I know what's involved and what it takes to serve. I hope to have your confidence and your support in that process. Thank you.
I thank you so much for your service, Robert, through the years, not just now. And, thank you so much for taking up the time, speaking with our viewers today. We wish you all the very best. I understand the primary is on August 23rd.
August 23rd, early voting starts 10 days earlier. If you check out ZimmermanForCongress.com, we'll have all the details for you, and you can call us directly as well. And I'm honored to be with you, Tarjo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for taking up the time today. ਇਹ ਸਨ ਸਾਡੇ 3rd Congressional District ਦੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਰੋਬਰਟ ਜ਼ਿਮਰਮਨ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਵੈਬਸਾਈਟ ਦੱਸੀ ਹੈ, ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈਗਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵੈਬਸਾਈਟ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰੋ, ਬਾਕੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟਸ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਵੈਬਸਾਈਟਸ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰੋ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣੋ, ਕਿਨ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝੋ ਔਰ ਬਾਹਰ ਆ ਕੇ ਵੋਟ ਕਰੋ। 23 ਅਗਸਤ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਾਇਮਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, 10 ਦਿਨ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ अर्ਲੀ ਵੋਟਿੰਗ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਐਜ਼ ਅ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਆਈਏ, ਵੋਟ ਕਰੀਏ ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਵੋਟਿੰਗ ਬਲੌਕ ਬਣੀਏ। Thank you so much for watching. Robert, thank you so much. You have a very good rest of the evening.